So you're planning to move to France, or you've already got a job offer in your inbox, or maybe you're like staring at your employment contract, trying to figure out what you just signed. Either way, we're going to be talking about French HR, and French HR does not work the way that HR probably worked at your last job. So if you've just started working in France, or you're looking for a job in France, or you're going through like that kind of like interview stage, etc., if you're expecting it to be kind of like what you expect, it won't be like that. I've watched many people, I've seen many people misinterpret or misunderstand what HR is in France. I've done it myself. I've been on the other side. So I want to tell you how this actually works. And how do I know that it actually works is that if you're new here, I'm Diedre, I'm Jamaican, and I'm currently living in France. And right now I work in HR here in France. And so that means that part of my job is helping foreign employees get through their paperwork. So hires, renewals, just the whole shebang, right? Because I work in HR admin and operations. And I'm a foreign employee myself, so I've been on both sides where I didn't understand how French HR worked. And so I do understand. And then outside of like work that I do in France, I coach women through their move to France. So I'm seeing it on the internal insider France HR side, as a foreigner side, and then also on the side of helping women to go through and better understand how HR in France works. And so I decided that, we're going to talk a little bit about what I do as an HR professional in France. And I wanted to discuss a little bit more about just the inside, like how HR is organized. So that can help you get some more insights into job offers or what you're looking for, or even if you've just started your role in France. And so this is kind of like one of the videos that I wish somebody would have shared or I had stumbled upon. And so I'm sharing this with you because I think once you understand how it works and how HR in France is actually structured, you'll get a better appreciation of the administrative and bureaucratic side of France. And I think understanding this makes it a little bit easier to navigate. And with that, you kind of like start working with the structure and the system instead of like fighting against it with all the bureaucracy and all the madness that France comes with. So first, let me ask you something. When you think HR, what do you picture? You probably think one person is sitting in an office somewhere with a whole bunch of paperwork. So you probably think of HR as like just one person in one little office, and HR gives you whatever you need. So it's like benefits, payroll, your contract, if you need time off, you go to that one person. That's kind of like not how it's structured in France. Yes, you have all of these things in place and all of these different areas, but French HR is not like a person. For me, it's like really like a function. It's not even like a department the way that I would imagine it. It definitely does not work like how HR in Jamaica works. And so HR in France is split across multiple functions and people and sub departments, and it operates inside a body of law. And the law constrains and like restricts so much of what you can do in HR in France and what your HR person can do for you and what your job can do for you or what your manager can do for you on like any given Tuesday. And before I go further, if you're planning your move to France and you're trying to figure out like how all of this fits into your specific situation, so like your visa, your career, if part of your move to France is finding a job, or maybe you're currently negotiating or going through interviews with a company, I do one-on-one strategy sessions, and they're called Your France Blueprint because we build out your move to France specific to you in a one-on-one strategy session. And so the link's in the description. I'll come back to it at the end, so keep going with me. Okay, French HR. So like I said, French HR is kind of like split into different functions, sub-departments, etc. And in many companies of like bigger companies, you've got at least three or four, sometimes, yeah, three or four of these like departments working together. And they're together but kind of separate. Are they codependent? Like sometimes they act a little bit individually. So first you have like payroll or la paye. So payroll and admin, payroll, handles your salary, your bulletin de paie, so your pay slip, whatever like social charges, mutuelle, so like your health insurance, they process all of this. So if you have like any questions about your pay slip, then you go to payroll. You go to la paye. If you want to talk about a raise though, or promotion, you do not go to pay. And maybe we can do a breakdown of like what a French payroll pay slip can look like. Tell me if this is something that you're interested in. Tell me in the comments. And so you have the first subcategory, which is la pay, which is payroll. And then maybe like attached to that is admin du personnel. So it's like HR admin. And so that deals with like contracts, any kind of like amendments. If you have like a salary increase or if you have like change of role, that sort of thing. Your DPAE. I have no idea what that means in English. So it's the DPAE. DPAE is it's like a declaration. You declare that you're going to hire an employee, and you must fill that out before you're hiring, whether it's a foreigner or a French national or whatever. Admin du personnel, so ADP, ADP department does this and handles this. They handle like attestation, so like if you have like job employment letters, any kind of like declarations to like French admin, etc. So I would say payroll and admin and kind of like are together. And this is the HR admin side of things. And it's usually slow, it's usually very methodical, it's very technical, and you have to be quite perfect with the paperwork. It's actually quite very, very stressful for me on a day to day because I feel like anything goes wrong and it's just affecting and impacting somebody's life in a very, very, very real way. Not rocket science, and I'm not doing surgery. I wouldn't go so far as I'm saving lives, but it really, really does impact things if you get it wrong. If the contract is wrong or whatever, I feel like a lot of pressure doing this part of HR in France, especially. Because it's structured around so many rules and the law, I feel like there is not a lot of room for error. Okay, so those are like the first two sub-departments. And then you have, I call it HR ops, but it's more like your HRBP, and it's between, like, they sit, so your HR business partner, this part of things. I don't know if you want to call that ops, but I call it HR ops. This department sits between like employees and management, and they handle like the human stuff, conflicts, performance, career ladders, changes, that sort of thing, right? And they sit between, yeah, the management and the employee, and they tend to also work a lot with operationalizing the HR strategy of the company. And then you have a smaller department, which is international mobility. And many companies don't have this department, which is the department that is most important for you. And in larger companies, they will have this, but in general, this is probably handled a little bit between like talent acquisition and HR admin. Yeah. Sometimes it's one person, many times it's outsourced, especially for smaller companies. And the international mobility side deals with like relocation, visas, work permits, autorisation du travail, work authorizations, and things like this. This is a part of actually my role in what I do. As well, I deal with, like I said, a lot of relocation, visas, and that kind of like work permits, especially with the foreigners in my company, including myself. And this is why am I talking about this? It matters for you because when you start working in France and you have like an HR question, you might be sending it to the wrong person or the wrong place, or you might expect like this one person should respond, or you might think like they're ignoring you because of the length of time it takes to answer your questions or to get back to you. But it's not really about, you know, if they're ignoring you or dodging you or they're really too slow. Part of the process can be slow because of the different layers that they might have to go through. And so I'm just trying to like explain this side of how France works. And I think understanding the HR structure helps to understand a lot, some admin, like the bureaucracy of France as well, because it can operate in sometimes a rigid structure of things that is clearly outlined, and you do have to follow like step by step certain things. And so it might feel not as flexible or fluid as you're used to. And there isn't like one person who can like totally make all the decisions and just decide if they want to do this, then they're implementing this. Like, no, right? So I think that's a big thing that many foreigners like they misunderstand, or they don't like really understand the extent to which how it's structured. And I've had Jamaican clients, American clients, Indian clients. I worked with, people in Morocco, like foreign employees that just kind of like misunderstand some of these things, right? And really, a lot of French HR is just it's structure, and you just have to deal with the structure. And this is a lot. France administration, France bureaucracy. It's just sometimes structure. So like, hmm. So I had like a one time there was this I was working on a blueprint for a client, and they in fact had worked they were already working. They had just started working, and she felt like her HR person was just ignoring her because it was taking like a week to respond. And she was like really, really anxious and stressed because it was also like attached to a visa work permit question that she had. And she ended up because she was she's a friend. And so she ended up like reaching out to me, and we worked on her France blueprint from before, and so she reached out again about it since after she had already found her job, etc. And I had to like really explain to her that, okay, yes, you sent it to your HRBP and you had like this question, but it's really not really the HRBP that does this. It's probably it's the HR admin more than likely who has to like respond to that question. And the HR admin person has to like go through different layers of the French HR system in order to get like that answer. And I'm going to explain what those layers. I think there are four broad categories. Four? Yes, four broad categories. And so I had to like really explain how HR in her company likely worked because she was coming from a different structure, right? And so she wasn't used to navigating so many layers. And so she she just did like my friend, my client, just didn't understand how it was designed. And knowing how it's designed is like the first part in making settling into France and into your job much more easy, much easier. So the thing that once you get it, right, it changes how like you interact with your jobs and with HR. And so like I said, French HR in France doesn't operate on company policy first. You might think, oh yeah, it's a company policy. You just follow the employee handbook, etc. No, they don't even do it. There isn't even really an employee handbook. Maybe to a certain extent, but French HR operates on the Code du Travail first, so the labor law first, the labor code, like very intimately. Of course, every other country has their labor law, etc. But I feel like And in my experience, especially like working in different countries, I don't feel like the labor law is so attached to how HR functions in a company. So I worked in India, in Colombia, in Jamaica. I've had close friend. I haven't like worked in the US, but I have close friends in the US. I spent a lot of time with corporate people in the US, and just I don't think it's really as attached, right? And so, like I said, the first category, the first layer is that French HR operates with the Code du Travail, the labor code, the labor law. And so before your HR person can do anything for you, they have to check what the law allows. Like really, I have to really check. Unless like I already know, but you really have to like check. And then that's the first layer. So that like it's the big, I don't know. Is it the roof? No, I think it's like more like the floor, the foundation that everything's built on. And then after they check, the Code du Travail, you have to then check the Convention Collective, which is the collective bargaining agreement. This is kind of like, for me, the reference would be kind of like your workers' union. So the industry-wide like workers' union for your sector. Is it like the trade union? But the Convention Collective is the industry-wide collective bargaining agreement for the sector or the industry in which you work. So if you work in a tech industry, there is, a convention collective, collective bargaining agreement. If you work in agriculture, there is a different one, etc. And that allows, let's say, how companies in that industry are able to navigate and negotiate and have certain interpretations or leeways or different ways of maneuvering the labor code, the Code du Travail, right? So that's the second part. So your HR also has to look at the Convention Collective. So they look at the Code du Travail, the labor code. Then they look at the Convention Collective, like how does your workers union, trade union, interpret certain aspects of the labor code as it relates to your industry and what's needed and what's best for the way that you practice. And so this is the HR has to also then look at that. And then afterwards, you have to look at what's called the company agreement, if there is one. Bigger companies tend to have a company agreement. This, you could say it's like the company policy, but it's a little bit more than that. It's like the notarized company policy. So it's because you can have the company agreement and then still have company policy that is not a part of the company agreement. So it's like the notarized official set in stone company policy that the company must follow, and it's based on certain things like working hours, etc. And so that's the third layer, the company agreement. So you have a question for let's backtrack. You have a question for HR. They have to look at the labor code, then see how the labor code is applied by the workers union, the collective bargaining agreement, and then look at the company agreement to see how that's also like all those two things are interpreted at the company level. And this is like the notarized part. This is outside of like company policy. And then they look into your individual contract to see like what is there. There's you have to go through this kind of like 3 to 4 layers minimum. Every time there's like an HR admin question, especially when it relates to like your contracts and stuff like this, visas, relocation, etc. Like every time. And so really like every time that's like how it works. And so yes, eventually you'll get to know more about the labor code if you're working in French HR. I know quite a lot about the French labor code. I know a lot about the collective bargaining agreement for my industry. I've also worked on like building out helping to building out the company agreement of companies, like, and so there are things that you just through learning and through experience, like you learn it more and you don't have to like line by line check. But you do have to run through those layers, those those four things every time. So when you interact with HR in France, if they take like a long time, 4 days to come back to you, it's not, because they don't care, they have like a lot of things. It could be that they're probably like maybe stumped upon there's maybe some contradictions or some interpretations that needs like a bit of ironing out or whatever before HR can like give you an answer, right? And this is kind of like how French bureaucracy operates as well. So even when you're talking with the embassy, you're applying, you're figuring out like your visa, you've sent in the application to move abroad. Even like through that process, it can take a long, long time because there are like so many different structures that they do have to go through. I'm not saying that always agree with those structures or that those structures don't invite inefficiencies. Like this is not what I'm saying. I'm just trying to let you know that these are the layers that you have to like go through each time. That's all I'm saying. So this is part of like what I want you to take from the video, what to take from our discussion, how we're talking right now. There's a key part, and it's that what looks like slowness in the bureaucracy of French HR, the bureaucracy of how France works. That machinery is also the same thing that protects you in a lot of real ways. So, for example, you can't be fired at will in France. Like, that's not a thing. Like, nobody at the company can look at you and say, you're fired effective immediately. Impossible. Uh, Never say never, but like, very, 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 very hard to do. At least you need at least like a month. Or unless there's something like super serious that happens. And even then, so that's the layers of things and the way things are constructed. You cannot be like fired, you know, like immediately, unless you're going through your trial period and then there is a difference. And even then, it cannot be immediate because there are notice periods that you have to respect within the probation period of your job. It does make it easier, but there are notice periods. There are like severance calculations. You have to have like written justifications. Yeah. So even though you have those slow layers for you when you have a question for HR or when you're trying to like get your job in France, etc., it's also slow for the company on the other side when it comes to like their interests. So this is also like a thing that helps it's the same machinery that protects you as well. You also have like the CSU, the CSC, which is the workers council that works within the company to like protect employment rights. There is certain decisions that the company make. They have to negotiate it with the CSC. You have different levels of how that works. Some CSCs, especially in the bigger companies, are like their own machine. It's like their own business working, office company working within the company. It's like a whole thing. So then there's other things like paid sick days are written into law. It's how you can take it, what days are available, how it's treated in terms of whether you're paid or not. Like it's written into law and it's not up to the manager to decide. And it's not like you don't have a limit of 10 sick days for the year because that I've never understood that. It really makes no sense because how can you tell someone how many days they're allowed to be sick? Like you don't know how many days you're going to be sick. I've never understood this. So I am with France here on understanding how sick days are to be interpreted, etc. Like you don't have like that thing. We all know vacation in France, it's not negotiable. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but 25 days of vacation minimum. You don't get a lot of those social protection without the layers of French HR. And so even though sometimes, even with me working in HR, I can get really annoyed with how slow it is. I appreciate, on the other hand, as a foreigner, that they exist because they protect a lot of my rights. And it helps me to have a clear idea, a good idea of how I can operate. It's not at the whim and fancy of my manager or the company or whatever. Like, there are clear things that I can check, I can look into. I'm not saying it's the easiest thing to understand, but it's there and I can have like a resource that makes sense. And and I had that like realization when I really started working in HR. So even when I was in school in France studying, yes, we did HR and there were HR components, but I really didn't understand like fully until I started working in HR itself. To like really understand like the ins and outs and the pros and cons of it. And even, like when I do checkup calls, when we have like checking calls with clients afterwards, if they've found their job, etc., then like sometimes we catch up, like if we stay in contact, etc. Like they really realize that I was so annoyed by how long things would take. And that same thing that's like driving them up the wall is the thing that's making their job feel a little bit more stable because they know what they need and it's making it stable for the first time in many years. You're not stressed about, oh, I'm going to be fired tomorrow. Like there are processes and there are things that you can do to safeguard yourself, improve. You have time to work through issues. You also have time to work through to find another job, for example. If the one that you found, you realize it's not working out, things like this. So once you see it, I feel like you can't really like unsee it, and I hope that you can really appreciate it. If you're looking for a job, if you're looking for a job to work to France, like I hope you can understand that this is there to help you. HR communication. This I think catches people off guard a lot. HR, so you can probably tell French HR is super duper paper heavy or email heavy. I don't know if it's still paper heavy. Everything has to be like traceable. Everything is in writing. It's also the way HR speaks sometimes can be rigid. Even I am guilty of it. Like I get into. Sometimes I tell like my manager, I prefer to be clear than friendly. Like I want to give like the full steps of things so that people are, clear on what they're doing or what they need to do or what we can do. And so it's also interacting within HR is also like still very formal. So the French language that you use is still also like super duper formal. Sometimes it reminds me of when I was in Jamaica and I used to work with government agencies. Some of the language is like very rigid, even though it's in French. It reminds me of this. But yeah, the HR communication is always in paper. They always want confirmation, and it can be like a bit rigid. Pro move. CYA, cover your ass all the time. Confirm everything in writing. I am not that great at this. I'm still working on it. Sometimes I think the Jamaican culture of having a bit more fluidity and in context and in the way that we communicate, we're a lot more comfortable with figuring things out as you go along. Sometimes I forget to, well, not forget, but sometimes I resist that whole confirm everything in writing because it can take a lot of energy and you're like, can't we just have a phone call? No, put it in writing. So put everything in writing. Yeah, French HR communication is formal, put everything in writing. It can be like quite rigid. You can't like say, hey, hey. It's usually, very French. Some of like French business language is formulaic. Like you have things that you have to say at the start and you have different ways, special ways of like ending your emails or your letters. And there are like different layers of politeness and courtesy and formal speech that you can do to when you're in French HR. And then when it goes to visas, right? French HR and your visa, your work permit. I think this is a section that foreign employees need the most and they ask the least about, right? You should ask your HR about this. And like I said, sometimes the company does not have a international mobility section that really specializes in, work permits and things like this. But you should ask the question so that if you need some help, you can ask it earlier out. Sometimes the company will have, outsourced or external partner that can help with this. And the general picture when it comes to like working through work authorization, French work permits, etc. with HR, is that HR will issue your contract for your visa application, right? And they'll issue the attestation de travail when you ask for it. Attestation de travail, you like your employment letter when you ask for it. And you will need this for housing, for renewals, for rent, for when you need to go to the prefecture. You need quite a lot, many times the attestation de travail, your employment letter. And so they handle the employer side of the work permit paperwork. And then they also sometimes handle OFI registration. So OFI is the Office of Immigration when it applies, right? But HR is not your case manager. So and they don't know because they're not the expert, right? HR is not going to go to the prefecture for you. They're not going to like chase your appointment for your work permit, even though it's in their interest as much as yours. I think the stakes are a little bit higher for you though in this regard. HR is not going to build your work permit renewal dossier. This is your work for you to do. If your company has like a real mobility function, then more of this part is supported and you can have like real support from your company, but many times it doesn't exist and your HR person may not have the time or the capabilities or the expertise in this department. And very typically, many companies, in my experience, don't have like a specialized mobility function unless you're in the bigger companies. And so the smaller, more domestic the company is, then the more of work that you need to do for this part. And I think many foreign employees, don't realize where the line is or how much they need to do until they're like a month away, 3 months away from their deadline and they're panicking. Don't be that person because if you only have 3 weeks to do any admin work in France, you are late. Very, very late, and you're cutting it real thin. You're living a dangerous life. Don't do that. Get things ready 2 months in advance, 2 to 4 months in advance. Trust me. So you need to build your own file, track your own dates, keep copies of every pay slip and every attestation that you get. Like, yes, keep all of them. They're your partner. HR is your partner for your visa life, but you are like your case manager, and you always will be. So just keep that. The last thing, which is a bit of a mind shift, is looking at how much power your manager has or does not have as it relates to your work life and French HR. So in France, your direct manager has, I would say, significantly less like unilateral power over your job than you might be used to. So in the same way that, I said it's really quite difficult to like fire you immediately. It's like next to not happening. Similar, there are other things that your direct manager just cannot decide on their own and they have to go through the different layers of HR, and it's an HR question and not a manager question. So let's look at them. Like I said, your manager cannot fire you on their own, There's a procedure that HR has to follow, that your manager has to follow. They have to do the entretien préalable. They have to have written justification. You have to give notes, all of these things. Your manager can request that you be let go. But the process of dismissal, let's say, belongs to HR and to the labor code. It's the same thing with raises as well. So salary increases, there is usually like a salary band that's tied to the collective bargaining agreement, the convention collective that I talked about, the workers union, the trade union. The trade union. There's usually a salary band and a salary grid that's attached that gives ceilings and minimums of how much raises, how an employee's salary can be raised. And there are pros and cons to this. One, again, it's a transparency. You know exactly. Sometimes it's attached to like tenure. If you have an employee working for 1 year, then after 1 year, they must have X amount of increase. After 5 years, the next one, etc. There are like different things in terms of like your level of competence because that also is tracked. There is also like an annual review that impacts how salary increases are done. And then sometimes there are mandatory increases written into the Code du Travail, so the labor code or the collective bargaining agreement from your trade union, that your employer has to respect regardless of your performance. So there's just like your manager cannot just say, oh, I'm going to give you a 20% raise. It doesn't work like that. Yes, they have wiggle room and they have room to maneuver and navigate within that, but it's a box and the box is controlled tightly by the convention collective many times. And so your manager has influence, but they don't have like this big individual, like huge influence over how your career goes or not. I think I think that's like a good part. I appreciate it. Yeah, I appreciate that there is again structure and things. There is a process to it that if you follow that process, you can get some results for sure. Let me get some water. And so I think this means like two things for you. So one, if you're like having a hard time with your manager, structurally, that situation is like a lot less catastrophic. What's this word? It's a lot less problematic than you are thinking if you're having like a hard time with your manager. Because your system, the HR function in France, also has guardrails on what your manager cannot do. There are things that they can override. So that helps you in one way. The second way is like if you're trying to advance, which I said, then you cannot also just like charm your manager and expect everything to flow. No, there's again a structure and there's things that you can follow and there is, I don't know if you want to call it a checklist, but there's steps that you can take. And you cannot just, your network and personal influence is minimized a lot more than you might be used to or you might see in the media, especially if you're in, like American HR. Of course, networking and who you know and that sort of thing is important, and it's it's really, really important in all cases. But I'm just saying that you cannot solely rely on it because there's that constraint. There's also a box that you have to follow. And so you have to understand the structure that your career will sit inside when you move to France, and you start working in a French company or a company in France. So you have like the review cycle, the promotion process, the role grading in terms of level of expertise and competence, the salary bands, just, explaining this because sometimes even talking with friends, etc., just talking with friends, they might be like wondering why don't you just talk to your manager about this part? And it's like, yeah, you can't just negotiate one-on-one with your manager because your manager can't just give you things all the time. Like it doesn't. And did I have? It's more just more a friend that I worked with, just in terms of like giving advice from what I know and my experience working with your friend's blueprint and also in HR itself. There was a friend who did have a similar situation, and he, was having trouble with understanding how it worked. And what he was able to do was look at how promotion and salaries were organized in his company. And he was able to push back on the company. So we talked about it, like he asked me for like my advice, etc. And he was able to give a pushback in a very credible way. And so within and also understand how much room he had to like negotiate because they were not following certain policies, which like I said, you can't just not follow the policy. And so within a few months, he was able to move up a salary band, and have a better restructure for his role and salary bump and etc. That, his manager couldn't just give him unilaterally, even if the manager wanted to. And so it's more like the system and the structure of HR that helped to give it to him, even though he was also battling with HR as well, but not the manager, really. And so that's the move. Learn the rules of the game that you're actually in, and it will make things much easier. So quick recap. French HR is like a split function. Learn who handles what, who will spend, or you'll spend a lot of time feeling ignored or feeling like things are going slow. French HR it's on the law. It's not the company policy, it's on the law. And for many times, it's even more the trade union that HR in France runs on. And so that's why it can be slow, but it's also why it can protect you. Writing, writing, writing. If it's not in writing, it didn't happen. Even though sometimes they like to not put things in writing, especially if you're talking with managers. I had that experience, but in general, it's in writing. It's a partner in your visa life, but it's not your case manager, and they cannot like push things for you. 100% responsible for your work permit and what happens in France as it relates to your visa, etc., and not your job or HR. They can help you and they will give you some support, but it's really, really on you to do. And then your manager has less power than you think as it relates to how you move within your job, and that's a constraint, but it can also help to protect you in certain things. And then I think once you see French HR for what it is, then the rest of your professional life, your career in France gets much easier. And I'm going to talk about my blueprint because none of what I just said laid out is generic, as you can see. It plays out completely different depending on like your visa type, can sometimes affect things or give demands on like your salary, what you need to work, things like this. So whether you're going into, and this, it doesn't matter if you're going into like a French company or a multinational subsidiary or whatever. Whether your industry falls under like a strict convention collectif or like a more looser one. There are so many, but there are a few very popular ones that you're likely to have as a collective bargaining agreement your trade union will have. Yeah, whether your company has a mobility function or it doesn't. Like if you want me to walk through how French HR could function in your specific situation, especially if you have a job or you want to find a job, then that's what your France Blueprint is, right? You can have a one-on-one session with me. I said link is in the description. If you're not there yet, no pressure. Subscribe, watch the rest of the playlist. I have tons of videos that you can binge in terms of like what you can expect. Starting out for companies, what you should do in terms of if you have like 12 months to move to France, what you can do. Huge playlist for you to binge. So you can build the picture, build your blueprint, imagine it one video at a time. I'm Diedre. I help women to move to France and I help them to design lives that actually fit what they want because they deserve it and you deserve it. See you in the next one. Ciao.